Number 7. Danielle Jones. A 23-year-old Florida woman suffered permanent brain damage after being beaten into a coma by a roommate she had met on Craigslist in early 2016. Danielle Jones needed someone to help her pay the monthly rent for the Miami apartment in which she resided. The young woman was on the verge of eviction as a result of the mounting financial pressure brought on by her previous roommate's sudden departure. After posting an ad to Craigslist in search of a new housemate, Jones received a message from Byron Mitchell, aged 35. He was an Air Force veteran with a clean criminal history who expressed an interest of moving into Jones's apartment for a month. She uncovered no red flags while looking into Mitchell's background, and her urgent need for rent money compelled her to accept his offer without vetting him any further. Only 1 week after the living arrangement had been finalized, Jones was viciously attacked by her new roommate. Mitchell reportedly punched, choked, and stabbed the victim, leaving her in a trauma-induced coma that lasted for 24 days. Jones's brain was severely damaged by the assault to the extent that she was left unable to perform certain basic functions and struggled to complete her academic assignments. Mitchell claimed to have been acting in self-defense during the attack, alleging that Jones was the one to have initiated the altercation by attempting to stab him with a knife. Jones vehemently denied the allegations, and Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty of attempted murder. Number 6. Brooke SLOCUM and Charles OPPENNEER. In July of 2014, a young couple was brutally murdered by a man whom they'd encountered on Craigslist. 25-year-old Charles OPPENNEER and his pregnant girlfriend, Brooke SLOCUM, aged 18, contacted a man named Brady Ostrike via an ad on the website. Ostrike was an energy company lineman interested in meeting up with the couple at his Wyoming home. An agreement was reached for the three to engage in intimate activities in exchange for payment. By accepting the offer, however, OPPENNEER and SLOCUM had unsuspectingly walked into a deadly trap set up by the 31-year-old man. Both of the victims were violently assaulted and murdered after meeting up with Ostrike on July the 12th of 2014. 5 days later, OPPENNEER's decapitated body was found in a park. Local authorities began examining the victim's online presence and eventually identified Ostrike as the prime suspect. Police subsequently converged on Ostrike's residence as the man was pulling out of his driveway. After a brief chase, Ostrike decided to end his own life by intentionally crashing his car. Teenage SLOCUM's dead body was found in the trunk of his vehicle. She'd been held captive by Ostrike for 5 days. Following their initial meeting, he abused her multiple times before she was ultimately strangled to death. Investigators speculated that Ostrike was going to dispose of SLOCUM's corpse on the night of his fatal encounter with police. OPPENNEER's detached head remained missing for 5 years before it was eventually found in Michigan. The Kent County medical examiner was able to positively identify the unearthed skull as belonging to OPPENNEER, who died after suffering a gunshot wound to the head. Number 5. Katherine Ann Olson. In 2007, a young woman was murdered in Savage, Minnesota, by an individual who expressed an interest in the nanny services she offered on Craigslist. Katherine Ann Olson, aged 24, was a graduate student at St. Olaf College who worked as a nanny in her spare time. She was contacted via the website by 19-year-old Michael John Anderson, who posed as a married woman named Amy. Anderson claimed that he wanted to hire Olson as a nanny, and the two scheduled an in-person interview, which the teenager arranged to be conducted at his parents' home. On October the 25th of 2007, Olson showed up at the address he'd given her, believing it to be occupied by the woman she knew as Amy and her family. Upon the young woman's arrival, Anderson lured her into his upstairs bedroom and fatally shot her in the back. He then placed her body in the trunk of her car and drove it to the Kramer Nature Preserve in Burnsville, where it was discovered the following day. The authorities were able to rapidly identify Anderson as the prime suspect, but in their subsequent interviews with him, he maintained his innocence, claiming to have witnessed a friend carry out the murder. Evidence collected by investigators indicated that Anderson had acted alone, however, and he was eventually convicted of first-degree murder. He was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 4. James Sanders. On April the 28th of 2010, a 43-year-old man was shot and killed following a home invasion perpetrated by 4 individuals. The incident was precipitated by a Craigslist ad posted by James Sanders, who'd been in contact with the 4 suspects Prior to his death, they were purportedly interested in a diamond ring that the man had offered for sale online, stating an intention of offering the valuable item as a Mother's Day present. The two parties subsequently arranged a meeting at Sanders' home in Edgewood, Washington, so that the prospective buyers would have a chance to inspect the ring. 3 men and 1 woman arrived at the residence and proceeded to take Sanders' entire family hostage, including his wife Charlene and their 2 young sons. When Sanders attempted to intervene and protect his family, he was fatally shot. The 4 suspects were later identified as Claiborne Bernard, Joshua Reese, Kiyoshi Higashi, and Amanda Knight. It was believed that the group's deadly descent on the home wasn't the only Craigslist robbery in which they'd taken part. They were ultimately convicted of multiple offenses, including first-degree murder, and they each received prison sentences ranging from 71 to 124 years. The diamond ring that had originally been advertised on Craigslist was eventually found at a pawn shop in San Francisco. Number 3. Natalie Bollinger. A man accused of fatally shooting 19-year-old Natalie Bollinger in Broomfield, Colorado, claimed to have been hired to carry out the murder by Bollinger herself. The victim was first reported missing by her boyfriend on December the 27th of 2017. The following day, local police discovered Bollinger's body in the wooded area of a dairy farm not far from her house. She had sustained a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, and her autopsy revealed the presence of a potentially lethal amount of heroin in her system. 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, Bollinger had written a lengthy Facebook post in which she claimed that she was being stalked by a man named Sean Schwartz. He was investigated for a potential involvement in Bollinger's death, but was neither arrested nor charged in connection to the crime. Law enforcement's examination of the evidence instead led them to a 22-year-old man named Joseph Michael Lopez. During his interview with investigators, Lopez admitted to shooting and killing Bollinger, but insisted that the young woman had asked him to do it in the first place. He claimed to have encountered a Craigslist ad titled, "I want to put a hit on myself." Lopez then contacted Bollinger, the alleged author of the post, and reportedly agreed to kill her after first attempting to talk her out of it. Lopez's account of the night on which Bollinger died changed during the course of the investigation. He first admitted driving the victim to the location where her body was subsequently found, but claimed that she was the one to shoot, pulling the trigger on herself. Forensic evidence discredited this version of the events, and Lopez eventually confessed to having shot Bollinger after reportedly joining her in a brief prayer. Faced with the possibility of life imprisonment, Lopez was sentenced to 48 years behind bars after pleading guilty to the crime. Today's topic was requested by Orion, Maria Martinez 18, B. Bustin, and Ramela Carney. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Donna Jew. Donna Jew, aged 19, passed away after attending a house party thrown by a man she'd met online. In 2007, the victim was going to college in California and had offered math tutoring services via a listing on Craigslist. Jew was contacted by a man named John Stephen Burgess, who subsequently invited her to a party at his Los Angeles area residence. Burgess reportedly gave Jew a deadly mixture of heroin, cocaine, and alcohol during the course of the evening. He claimed to have discovered her lifeless body upon waking up the following morning. The man later told law enforcement that he was overwhelmed by panic and thus recklessly decided to dump the body into the Pacific Ocean. Investigators never found Jew's remains, and it was therefore impossible to scientifically corroborate Burgess's account of the events that led to her death. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and concealment of an accidental death. His 5-year prison term was reduced for good behavior after he'd served half of the sentence. Number 1. The Richard Beasley murders. An Ohio man was sentenced to death in April of 2013 after he was found guilty of luring multiple victims to his remote farm and murdering them with the help of a teenage accomplice. The series of cold-blooded killings were carried out by Richard Beasley over the course of 3 months. In the fall of 2011, Beasley's 17-year-old daughter had helped him set up a listing on Craigslist that advertised a living caretaker position on his 688-acre farm. The advert promised applicants a wage of $300 per week, as well as accommodation in the form of a 2-bedroom trailer. In November of 2011, Beasley offered the job to a single man in his late 40s named Scott Davis, with whom he met at a restaurant in Noble County. Beasley was accompanied by Brogan Rafferty, aged 16, who was introduced as his nephew. Davis later shared a ride with them to a wooded area located roughly 100 miles south of the city of Akron. The three men exited the vehicle with Davis walking ahead of the other two as he surveyed the land that Beasley claimed to own. At some point during the exploration of the area, Davis suddenly heard a clicking sound and turned around to find that Beasley had brandished a firearm and pointed it in his direction. Beasley opened fire, but Davis managed to escape with non-fatal wounds to his arm. The victim hid in the wood for 7 hours before he was able to reach a nearby house and contact the authorities. During the period in which Davis was hiding for his life, Beasley entrapped another man, 47-year-old Tim Kern, who'd recently lost his job as a street cleaner and was struggling to support his family. Beasley fatally shot Kern behind an abandoned shopping center and dumped his body in the bushes. The Craigslist killer, a moniker under which Beasley would come to be known, was arrested by police while walking down the street in broad daylight. Investigators discovered that he'd slain a total of 3 individuals in the same manner he'd attempted to murder Davis. Beasley was ultimately given the death penalty, while Rafferty was sentenced to life in prison for aiding in the serial killer's crimes. Thanks for watching. Would you rather furnish your home entirely through Craigslist purchases or only be allowed to date blindly for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments section below.